All right. Okay. So, welcome everybody to Silicon Valley Influence. My name is Brian Sparks. I'm an executive communication coach and business coach with Heroic Voice Academy. The goal of this program is to speak with Silicon Valley leaders and flesh out conversational frameworks and insights so that you can accelerate your influence to build trust, connection, and social capital. The format of the show is built around 7 leadership questions. We pitch these questions to our guests who then listen for the clues that frame the mindset to be influential. Today on our show, we have Lara McCulloch, who I am a big fan of. Laura, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. You are just a gem in the branding world. Let me just I want to read some things here that I have on you
Oh dear.
that are super exciting. Well, no, it's
Depends
you.
where you got that stuff from. Yeah.
So let's do this here. Tell you what, let's start here because again, this is the purpose of the show is to be just conversational. So for the purpose of uh, an elevator pitch, could you introduce our audience to who you are, what you do? Because my excitement will just go off the chart and go on forever, but I want you to kind of introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah, sure. So, from a business perspective, I am a brand positioning strategist, have been for the last 28 years, started when I was two. And I help service based businesses win more business. That's ultimately what I do. And I've had a long career doing this. I worked the first half of my career mainly with Fortune and global brands. Shell, Good Humor Breyers, Johnson Johnson, Pfizer. So I cut my teeth on really, really big accounts. And then the latter half has been spent with small to medium sized businesses, which I love personally because I get to work with the president of the organization and really help to make change. But in my spare time, I mean, really, and not even in my spare time, like I try and thread this through everything that I do. But I'm a bit of an adventure hunter by nature. So even in my business, I try and thread adventure through it, pushing myself out of my comfort zone a lot. And we can talk about that a little bit. I like to jump from perfectly good planes, swim with sharks, take up new sports all the time just to kind of push myself again out of my comfort zone and off of my couch.
That's awesome. And you took a
Yeah.
big risk about 12 years ago going from that comfortable corporate job where you were doing really well and decided to launch into this space. What was that
Mhm.
transition like?
Yeah, that transition was interesting. When I started in the agency world, there weren't many women kind of at the top rung of the ladder. There's lots of women in the agency world, but they tend to be client service and quite low down on the on in the rungs, at least back when I was doing it. And so I was told as a woman, if you want to be where I had someone that I really looked up to who was a mentor, and she said, if you want to be where I am one day, you've got to work harder, later, and longer than anybody else because you're a woman. And so that's what I did. I worked 20-hour days. I'd go to the agency and I'd be wearing my pajamas and we'd sleep overnight, working on a pitch and kind of start the next day. So that was amazing. Like it was such an amazing experience and I learned so much, but I also learned that it wasn't sustainable. And so it was actually quite easy at one point for me to say, I just can't do this anymore. This isn't what I want my life to look like. And so one day, when everybody thought I was totally crazy because I had achieved, this great position, this great income, and was working on really high profile businesses, I quit. And I didn't know what I was going to do next, to be honest with you. I knew that this was the only career that I knew, and I absolutely loved it. But I knew that working for an agency wasn't going to be it. And so I ended up starting my own consultancy, where I do exactly what I just shared with you. And even that transition was really interesting because I knew in order to do what I needed to do, I needed to kind of build my authority. And I was at an industry event a number of years ago on a cruise ship in the Toronto Harbor. Um, and I was there with the intent of meeting new people and kind of learning about different industries. And it was put on by an association. And all of a sudden, I was kind of eating in a corner because I was quite shy and introverted. And I was supposed to be pressing flesh with people and kind of meeting people. And I was kind of off in the corner eating hors d'oeuvres, thinking about what I was going to say to the next person, and rally up some confidence and talk to somebody. And I heard my name being called over the loudspeaker, and they said, Lara McCulloch, we're holding this member moment. We want you to come over and introduce yourself at the stage. And the stage was basically a dance floor in the middle of this yacht. And so 150 people kind of circled around me, and I stood in the middle at this microphone. And it was my worst nightmare come true. My palms were sweaty, my mouth was filled with cotton, and I couldn't remember my name, and I couldn't remember what company I worked, what the company was. I just couldn't get it out. And I swore at that moment that that would be the last time I ever felt that. I jumped off the ship when it was docked, ran back to my place, and basically signed up to speak at the first largest national conference of its kind. I live in Canada, and my speech was accepted. And that actually launched me into public speaking, which is one of the things I didn't mention that I do as part of my career right now. So I'm a keynote speaker who speaks all around the globe. So that was really instrumental in pushing me out.
So you got addicted to the stage. I know that feeling of overcoming, sharing your story,
Yeah.
and there's kind of a motto that you live by. Do you want to share what you
Yeah, so I have a tattoo on my wrist that says "Make Stories," and that's a huge credo that I live by. I was joking with you earlier that I want to be the grandmother that all the kids gather around and say, tell me, tell me a new story. Um, and the only way you can do that is to really kind of push yourself out of what feels really comfortable. And so that's why it's been such a big thing for me, is to constantly, every time I feel that feeling of, I don't want to do this, I know that's the moment I need to push and try it, find a way to do it.
And it sounds like in all of those challenges and adversities, you seem to have a superpower of creativity. And the reason why I'm maybe cherry picking that is because you talk openly about when COVID hit and you had to pivot because you lost a lot of the business. Things changed. We were all pretty much on lockdown. And you, at one point, you even started a blog. I mean, I'm going back before COVID, and people kind of laughed at you for doing that. You jumped on TikTok. It blew up for you in a good way.
Yeah.
And you really kind of take this mentality of tell stories, do the unique thing with your clientele. I know I just said a lot there, but I mean, are those really your superpowers where creativity is also in that space of adversity for you?
It's funny, I worked around so many creatives growing up. I don't consider myself highly creative, but what I have learned, so I began speaking in 2006 or 2007, and I was speaking about social media and business. And today that's like kind of like, oh, cool. Back then, I mean, you were just laughed at. People thought social media was for kids, just like people thought TikTok was for kids who dance around. And there's perceptions that people have about things. But the one thing I have learned over the years is when you can recognize a trend and you can see where something is going, there's emerging trends happening all the time. And if you can see how people are shifting and changing, and if you can jump into that early, the opportunities are immense. And that's what I saw with TikTok. It was a new social media tool. And again, having been involved kind of speaking about this from the onset, I've seen a lot of social media tools, as many of us have. But one thing is that when you can get into a really good one that's going to sustain itself and stay around for a long time, the earlier you can get on, the larger the community, because you have less competition. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to try this out. And it came at a time, you kind of touched on this. Before COVID hit, I was a fractional CMO. I worked with a maximum 4 clients per year. I had a really sweet business model. I worked less than part-time hours, and I was a keynote speaker, and I'd speak around the world, and I'd get to travel to these amazing places, and people would actually pay to hear me speak. And then COVID hit, and literally overnight, my clients, I had micro niched my business to service the events industry. There's a whole other story there. Events were the first to be hit, and they'll be the last to recover. And I was a keynote speaker. Events went away overnight. So you can kind of put those two together and imagine what happened when COVID hit. I got a phone call after phone call after phone call. My retainer client said, I got no one to market to anymore, so we can't continue on with you. And all of my speaking events were canceled. My national speaking sponsor went away. My international speaking sponsor went away because there was no events happening. And so I had to figure out what to do next. And I'd love to say that it took me like 24 hours and I figured it all out and I pivoted. It took me a year. I found ways to drive business without a doubt. But I had lost that guiding light that I always had. And so it took me a good year to find that guiding light again. And it simply came from a really small step where I said, here's this new platform, TikTok. I can't speak on stages anymore, but what if I can take, 60-second snippets of what I would normally share from a stage and instead share it on this platform and just see what happens. And that's what I did. And, the results spoke for themselves. Within a couple months, I was generating more leads than I had generated in 10 years from speaking on stages.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I related to working with startups here in Silicon Valley, where they're really looking to step out, and you've so graciously shared vulnerable moments where you pivoted from your career, your business took a hit. How would that translate now to somebody who has a business idea, product or service? What would you share with them as being their first step as becoming an authority in that space and starting up their business?
It's interesting because authority there's many different ways to build authority, but we obviously have this incredible opportunity, which is to build what I call owned authority, right? It's authority through our own channels. Some might argue they're borrowed, through social channels. What's the first step is to really think about, like, how do you want to be known? What is it that you're trying to get across to people, and how is that helpful to the people that you want to attract to you? Authority is one of those things. Like, there's most businesses that I talk to are generalists, right? So they think they're experts, but they're really generalists. They try and appeal to everybody, and they try to do everything for their clients, and they see that as being very helpful. It is for somebody who's already a client. For somebody who's not a client, it's confusing. It's ambiguous. Then you have experts, right? And these are people who have honed their craft over a number of years and have really specialized. We know that we pay more for experts than we do for generalists. But an expert is really somebody who's developed this expertise, but it doesn't mean that other people know that they have this expertise. And that's where authority comes into play. So authority is really important because it takes our expertise and it puts it on a grand stage and allows people to see what it is that we're an expert in. So we have to start with expertise. We have to know what it is we want to be known for. One of the biggest mistakes I see people making when they are trying to build authority is that they're all over the place. They're talking about this, that, and the other, and it's very confusing for people. It's also very confusing for the algorithm, which doesn't exactly help them. So yeah, starting off by really defining, like, what do you want to be known as an authority in?
That's a great point. Again, speaking to a lot of really, really smart people, their expertise can shine through. They could talk about all this subject matter in their particular area. But what you're saying is being aware. What I hear you saying is being aware of how your audience is receiving you. And if it's too much, it's too confusing. But once you really boil it down, they can go, oh, I need that specific thing. I love what you said in one of your TikToks. I was watching them today. Is people don't want to buy quarter-inch drills. They want to make quarter-inch holes.
Mm.
And that is a great shift. How do you take a client and educate them to communicate these messages from that perspective, the client's perspective?
Yeah. I didn't say that. That was Theodore Levitt. So I'd love to take I'd love to take credit for that, but it's not my quote. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this goes to everything, whether it's building authority, whether it's selling a product, whether it's selling a service, whether it's pitching, whether it's whatever. Like, nobody cares about you. Nobody, not except for you. You're the only person who cares about you. So if you want to do a compelling job of bringing people in, in a scrolling society, that's what we're in right now. It's just like scroll, 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 scroll. You have to hook people in by talking about them. So once I understand what I want to be perceived as an expert in, I need to think about, well, what are the problems and challenges and obstacles and everything that that person on the other side of the screen is having with regards to that topic, and how do I frame what I'm talking about in a way that's going to be compelling and meaningful to them?
Mm-hmm. I love that. So in order to kind of, you call it an authority plan. Now, is this having an authority plan include defining what that is and then running out a strategy? And how could someone put together a strategy in order to kind of understand what their market needs?
You know what? I think that's kind of I would actually recommend the opposite of that. So you've got to have a few elements of the strategy in place, but you just don't know what you don't know until you start putting stuff out there. And if I had sat in my house, a year after COVID hits, and I don't know what my guiding light is, and I'm just like, what am I doing? And I had sat out and wrote out this plan, I can guarantee you that what I put out there would have tanked, because I just didn't understand the market. I can say I've been in this business for a very long time. I think I know, but you really don't know. I'm constantly surprised by what people find compelling, by what people are drawn to, and the only way to really figure this out and figure out what questions people have and what they want and what they're looking for is to put content out and just be in the art of producing, not perfecting. And just be a constant producer. You will learn at such an accelerated pace. Now, there has to be some degree of strategy before you do that. You don't want to just get online and start to build authority about whatever, because there's no strategy. You need to know, like we talked about, how you want to be known. You need to know what people generally are looking for. But then just get out there and start producing would be my biggest thing. How do you know what type of content to develop? I'm a big believer in anti-narratives. So I come from a pedigree of branding, right? And branding, uh, from my perspective, was always about positioning a product or service in the minds of consumers, um, that kind of solves an untapped pain that nobody else is tapping into, right? Um, and I totally forgot where I was going with that. I was on a roll and then just totally lost it.
It was so
Part
yeah.
of the moment.
The question was, and it was great because I do that all the time too. So you and I see,
Oh, I know where I was. Yeah.
yeah, is about the anti-narrative
Yeah.
and strategy that you kind of do in reverse order.
Yeah. So really, if you look at some of the best brands and the most well-positioned brands in the world, they all have an anti-narrative. So Apple's a great example of this. They come on the scene and they're not really talking about, here's our faster processing and our beautiful colors. Those were elements of their story. But they came out and they positioned themselves as the rebels, the anti-conformists, anti-Orwellians, which was a very, very unique perspective that nobody would have placed with what it was that they were selling. But it was a way of saying, this is what people are talking about in our industry, and we're going to talk dramatically different. We're going to look, feel, and sound different. And how that applies to people like us, no matter whether you're building a product or service, is to take a look at, like, what are the constructs, the narratives, the things that exist in your marketplace right now, with your competitors, beliefs that currently exist, and what do you believe to be untrue? What is your different perspective on something that exists in your market? And hang your hat on that. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to embrace it and make it a part of your values.
Would you speak a little bit more about what you believe to be untrue? What does that mean? Because I love where I feel this is going. Can you speak a
Yeah.
little bit more to that?
Yeah. So, I worked with a law firm, and in the world of law, you're supposed to be very buttoned up and you're supposed to use really big words. And you're supposed to be like, think of all the things you think of when I say lawyer: expensive, the clock, basically there's like a little buzzer. Okay, we've got this amount of time to talk. And so there's certain perspectives about the industry. There's also a narrative that exists, right? The narrative sounds very um, it sounds very cold and very out of touch and not approachable and not kind and nice. And so, if we could position ourselves as someone who was approachable, who didn't use big language, who sounded totally different than any other lawyer out there, and sounded and hung their hat on care and taking care of their clients, and that is a very different that's an anti-narrative that existed. I think Hims did a brilliant job. If you're familiar with Hims, they're like a nutraceutical company. Specifically, they started for millennial men to solve three big problems. I think it was hair loss, erectile dysfunction, and adult acne. And when they came on the scene, the narrative that existed was that men don't care about this kind of stuff. These are things that women care about. It's a very feminine thing to care about your appearance. And so men suffered in silence. And the way that they didn't feel that anybody could relate to them because no men were really talking to each other about it. And so they took the position that men should care about it. And they created a brand about making it comfortable, accessible for men to get help, and to normalize a lot of these issues. So that's another example of an anti-narrative.
I love it. I think that's so useful when you can approach this strategy from multiple perspectives and find that message that pops. So that is a great tip. I appreciate that. What we're kind of getting low on time here. I want to make God, I could just talk to you forever. What do you think are the top three approaches to branding that startups or anyone that you're working with should consider as they're starting to develop their brand?
Well, we've touched on a few. I mean, definitely focus on authority building. If it doesn't serve you to be your industry's best kept secret. Another one would be focusing on attraction marketing. A lot of people get into in building their brands, they focus on paid advertising, things where they have to pay money in order to get their name out there. I'm a big believer that you should focus on attraction-based marketing first. It's the quickest way to learn about your market, learn about your message, learn everything you need to know about how to position and market your business before you pay a dime. If you can't get attraction marketing down, then don't start paying. Value is also perceived. It's not assumed. So we need to really become stealthy in the art of communicating value. And a lot of businesses use very vague terms when they talk about what they do. Especially service-based businesses, right? If any of your listeners are selling a service, it's really difficult for their prospective customers to understand what makes them different until they hand them money and choose to do business with them. So focusing on pre-sale proof is really, really, really important in brand building. It helps move a generic claim into a statement of proof. An example of that would be, instead of saying something like, we create seamless video transitions. It's being very clear about how many video transitions you've done and how much time you save people. So being able to quantify or prove what it is that you're saying to help differentiate you in a crowded marketplace. So I think some of those things are really important. And then, of course, the anti-narrative. In business, you've got three choices. You can be the low price leader. You can be the volume leader, which means you spend more than anybody else on advertising, or you have to have a disruptive cure, which means that you've created a sense of disruption by creating a cure to an untapped problem. Most people don't choose any one of those three, and they fall into the land of ambiguity. They sound, look, and feel like everybody else in their industry.
I love it. So a disruptive cure that brings wins more business. What does it look like for people to work with you?
In what regard?
So if someone was to reach out to you,
Yeah.
and I definitely want, as this starts to go out, the network out here in Silicon Valley, I highly recommend everyone who's watching reach out to Lara. But what would it look like? They're looking to establish their brand.
Yeah.
What does that look? I know that's a general term, but what would that begin to look like in the beginning?
Yeah, so 3 greatest problems people have when they come to see me is they're charging the lowest price or they're mid-price. They feel like they have to price, on par with their competition in order to win business. I focus on, helping them build a premium price. I build premium price leaders, in markets. That's what I love to do. The second is they find it very hard to differentiate themselves, and so they're kind of unheard of. They're not really well known in their industry. I help build them as the authority in their industry. And then the third is feast or famine sales. They're relying on word of mouth, they're relying on referrals, both great, but they're reactive forms of marketing. We don't have any control of that. So I focus on building predictable leads through authority marketing and automating their sales process. So we do that through one-to-one coaching.
I love it. And I have a ton of notes here on your pipeline health that I was watching earlier. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
I'd love to dive into that. But Laura, tell everyone how people can get connected with you. What's the best way to start that conversation?
Yeah, so you can find me on TikTok or Instagram at Win with Lara. Recently rejoined Twitter as well because I'm very curious what's going to happen there. But I'm at I think the Lara McCulloch or Lara McCulloch. And then my website is laramcculloch.com. So that's LARAMCCULLOCH.com. Wish I had a easier name, but
Well, you can't miss you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before everyone takes off, I'd like to invite you to the presentation gym on Thursdays from 12 to 1, where we help startups put together their pitch decks and communicate the message so that they can build trust and authority in their space and get a second conversation, because there's no guarantee from one conversation. You've got to work towards that second conversation. So go to heroicvoice.com/gym. You can plug into the live on Thursdays and we'll work on your pitch deck. Lara, amazing conversation. You're just as amazing in person as you are on all the content that you put out. So I want to thank you so much for joining Silicon Valley Influence today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun and you've made my day. So thanks.
You're awesome. All right. Bye, everybody. We'll see you soon. Stay safe.